Hi there. In this episode, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of democracy with a focus on the Enlightenment. Now, the Enlightenment is also known as the Age of Reason, and it's a time period that lasts between the mid-1600s up until the late 1800s. And what the Enlightenment is an intellectual movement. It's a change in how people thought and interpreted the world around them. Now, the whole point of the Enlightenment is it emphasized reason and science and observation, and it led to the discovery of what are called natural laws. Basically, the Enlightenment is an outcrop of the scientific revolution. So the ideas of science, of observation and the scientific method are being applied to both government and religion. Now, the Enlightenment completely changed how people saw the world. Before the Enlightenment, the world was centered on religion and faith. Even government was based on religion and faith. The monarchs used what was called the divine right of kings to justify their rule. Basically, in a nutshell, what it said was that God made me king, and who the heck do you think you are to question that? So both the church and the monarchs had complete control over the people, and they used God as kind of a way to justify their control over people. Now, in the Enlightenment, though, people are going to start questioning that. The Enlightenment ideas include the emphasis on liberty and individual rights. And there's two important Enlightenment writers that we're going to talk about. That's John Locke and Charles Montesquieu. Locke is the man in the back of the pictures, and Montesquieu is the one with the crazy wig. Now, John Locke is by far one of the most important philosophers and political theorists of the Enlightenment. He was also a trained doctor, so he's really putting those scientific revolution ideas to play, but he's putting them onto politics. His most important work on politics is called the Two Treaties of Government, and it was published back in 1689. Now, in it, he basically says that people are what are known as a blank state, a tabula rasa. So basically, when you're born, you know nothing at all. And as we experience the world around us, we are free to create who we are. So we are a product of our surrounding. He says also that people possess what are called natural rights, and that these were given to us by God to everybody on the planet. So think human rights. They include the idea that you have the right to preserve one's life, you can seize unclaimed valuables, and that you can basically defend yourself. Now, he also wrote that when people were first on the planet, we lived in what was called a state of nature. There's no government. We're basically hunters and hunters and gatherers, but we retain all these natural rights. The problem with the state of nature, though, is not that it's bad, it's just dangerous. Everybody's out for themselves. You have to work at survival every day. So as a result, John Locke claims that we created government, that we were willing to give up some of our natural rights in order to gain safety from a government. So it's kind of a give and take. Now, this deal of giving up natural rights in return for protection is called the social contract. The social contract exists, according to Locke, between the government and a society, a civil society, one that is based on citizens. And it's voluntary between the government and the governed. And you had to be willing to give up some of your control in order for the government to protect you. And Locke says if the government is legitimate, if it's a good government, then the people are willing to give up that power in order to get protection. Now, as you see here, we have this power transfer, and we have security being given over by the government to the people, and the people giving over their power in order for that security. That, in a nutshell, is what Locke's social contract is all about. Now, he also says that we operate under what are called natural laws. According to Locke, the government operates under what's called natural law. And the whole point of laws are to protect natural rights, kind of like your human rights. And it's the obligation of the government to protect the citizens' natural rights. Locke believed that if a government failed to do this, then it was up to the people to revolt and replace that government. Here in America, we're going to actually use that argument to justify the American Revolution with the Declaration of Independence. The other Enlightenment philosopher we're going to talk about is Montesquieu. Baron Montesquieu was a French lawyer and political philosopher. His famous work was written in 1748, and it's called On the Spirit of Laws. Now, according to Montesquieu, there's three different types of governments: a monarchy, a republic, and despotism. It's another word that we can throw around where we talk about rule by a dictator. Now, Montesquieu believed that a government that was elected by the people was the best form of government, so he liked the idea of a republic. He believed, though, that a successful democracy depended on the maintaining of the right balance of power. So it's from him that we get the idea of the three branches of government. He said that government should be set up so that no man need be afraid of another. And this is basically the separation of powers. There are three basic powers in any government: legislative power, the power to make laws; executive power, the power to implement those laws; and judicial power, power to review those laws. So his idea was that we needed three separate departments, or what we call today branches. The separation of powers ensures that power will not be concentrated with one group or one individual. If all that power was with the executive, we would end up with a dictator. Liberty or freedom is threatened if power became concentrated in one place. So his whole idea is that by separating the powers into three different branches, then the government couldn't threaten the freedom of the people. Now, both of these men had a huge impact on the Founding Fathers. When I talk about the Founding Fathers, I'm talking about the men who formed our government during the Revolutionary War. Locke's views of natural law and the social contract are reflected directly in the Declaration of Independence that was written by Thomas Jefferson. He pretty much quotes John Locke in the Declaration. Montesquieu's idea of separation of powers are found all over the U.S. Constitution. For the most part, the Founding Fathers were deeply concerned about the government abusing its powers. And they really wanted to make sure that the citizens had their freedoms. They believed that these freedoms, these natural freedoms, were created by God, natural rights. And they wanted to make sure that the government could not abuse them. The Enlightenment is still, those ideas are still used today. One of the examples is with the UN. In 1959, the UN passed what are called the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. And basically, it's trying to uphold human rights for kids. In 1949, 10 years before that, they passed the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which again, it's all about those natural rights, things like freedom of speech and religion. And the UN wanted to make sure people around the world had access to them. When it comes to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, one of my favorite people from history had a huge part in the development of that, and that's Eleanor Roosevelt, who had been First Lady during World War II, but she also became our first UN ambassador, and it's really going to be her that pushes for this Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Another example of how the Enlightenment is still used today goes back to Vietnam. And this is going to be an example with the separation of powers. Now, Congress is supposed to be the one that declares war. With Vietnam, they never really declared war on Vietnam. They let the president send troops. Well, it's going to go to the Supreme Court in the U.S. versus Nixon. And the court basically says that the idea of executive privilege is something that is allowed, but has to be reviewed by the court. So this is a prime example of how we still use those Enlightenment ideas of separation of powers. Okay, that's it.